Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle from WeAreSC.com. Here to talk about USC football and college football and whatever Greg wants us to talk about because I'm sure he'll have something
Wait, whoa,
interesting.
whoa, whoa, whoa. How you're going to start off on that type of thing? Whatever Greg wants.
Whatever
You're the
Greg
guy who's
wants.
directing this thing.
Whatever Greg wants. And we have the usual crew. We have Greg. You've met Greg again. And Eric and Mark and myself. Okay, some big news this week, guys. USC hired a general manager, Chad Bowden, which I think fills that Bowden need in college football, right? We had Bobby and Tommy and Terry, and then for a while there were no Bowdens at all, and that's when everything kind of fell apart. If you just timeline it, things went south with free agency and pay for play right about the time there were no Bowdens around. Um, Chad's not related to those guys, by the way. Let's talk about Chad Bowden. Let's talk first about what he brings to the table, and then we'll talk about some other issues related to that. Who wants to volunteer to go first? Who wants to tell us why Chad Bowden and why we should be excited about it?
I
All
got
right,
it.
Eric, you look anxious. Run
I
with
got
it.
it. So this is a significant hire, and it's big news for USC. Athletic departments now, football departments, you need multiple guys like this. You can't have someone who's running, assistant coaching searches and figuring out that side, and also player acquisition and also player retention and also dealing with NIL agents and all of that stuff. It's too big. It's too massive to hit all of those things. So when you start to sort of piece some of that apart and then put people in charge of different areas who have done that, Chad Bowden is huge for me because of what you hear from coaches who have coached with him, high school coaches who have dealt with him, players who have dealt with him, parents who have dealt with him. It's consistent across the board. Nobody recruits like he does. Nobody has sort of the understanding and the ability to stay in contact and find like what's going to drive this kid, what's going to be important to him, and go at that. And we're still in that sort of era where there's probably got to be some money behind everything for everybody, but I don't think that you can just brush past the really significant relationship building that is still important in talent acquisition. And you're going to have a guy now that's going to not hesitate to be the first guy to get in touch and will not let stuff slip through the cracks. And that's what you hear from everybody. This guy is as buttoned up and good at initial contact and then following every single thing through the entire process to get guys. So again, he's got to be backed up. You got to back those guys up with money and be financially in on a lot of these guys. But again, you have to have that sort of personal feel to recruiting because it's still recruiting. It's still that aspect of, am I comfortable there? Can I see myself there? That's got to be there. And I think Bowden is big for that. And he proved that at Notre Dame with what he was able to do with not a nothing NIL budget, but I still think less than what he's going to have at USC.
And less than what Notre Dame was competing against in the playoffs, right? I mean, you had some with Oregon and Ohio State and Texas. You had some NIL heavyweights there. Notre Dame is not an NIL heavyweight. They play the game too, but not at the same level. So, and I suppose it's also the case that this is a guy who comes from an institution that actually cares about academics too, like USC does, so that this is not going, it's not like coming from Alabama to USC or from Oregon to USC. That's a better example. I should use that in the first place. Mark, what are you hearing about Chad Bowden?
So the way that Eric built up Chad is, I think, and this isn't a knock because you do want to emphasize and focus on the positives, but it almost makes everybody feel like, oh, He's the savior. He's what USC needs. If he's going to be all about building relationships and recruiting, my response is, well, what is Lincoln Riley doing when he's recruiting? Isn't that part of a head coach's responsibility? Isn't his assistant coaching staff supposed to be able to develop, build relationships? For me, I think this is more about roster retention. What's so funny, Eric?
I mean, there are a ton of kids out there that you need to contact. And
Sure there are. Sure there
Lincoln's
are.
got a coach. You got a coach. There's got to be a guy who's running recruiting for you and building your roster, right? Transfer portal stuff, recruiting
Okay, but
stuff,
Eric,
all of that.
Eric, we're
You need as
talking
much
about
help as you can get on staff right now.
nobody. I guarantee you, if you and I were to wager $1,000 and we were to poll 100 USC fans, nobody knew Chad Bowden's name before Chad Bowden was hired by USC. If
Yeah, you
this,
knew about him at Notre Dame for sure. Marcus Freeman has raved about that
I
guy.
was pretty
I
clear.
mean, key to building
Clear.
that roster.
I was pretty clear. I said USC fans. I did not mention Notre Dame. And to your point, if he is such a valuable commodity, and again, I am not knocking the hire. Two things can be true at the same time. If he is such a valuable commodity, Marcus Freeman's right-hand man, the person he can least afford to lose because of lesser NIL, location, yada, 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 when it comes to recruiting, his strength, wouldn't you make every effort to keep him, retain him, not let him go to your arch rival of all places? I know he turned down Michigan the year before. USC obviously made him an offer he couldn't refuse, by all accounts, tripling his salary. Again, I think it's going to work out. He's coming in to handle certain duties, but I guess I'm more about managing expectation levels. We're going to see how big of a difference Chad is going to make working in LA at USC, because one of the things you mentioned was, consistently talking to high school coaches and parents and people who have dealt with Chad during the recruiting process, is that he's good at building relationships. But there was one individual parent that there was a comment from that parent that kind of stood out as well, that USC is missing some other key components. And maybe Chad is going to be that bridge to fix those missing components. We don't know. I do find it curious that after Notre Dame was able to retain all of those juniors and seniors that played together for 2 or 3 years and to get to the national championship game, he's leaving after that class is gone. He's not sticking around to continue building what he and Marcus Freeman did. That's my only concern. It's down here compared to everything else he brings.
Well, Mark, I love my job, but if somebody wanted to triple my compensation tomorrow, I would pretty strongly consider leaving. Well, look, Greg, you were not in long with Mark, which it does not surprise me. So go ahead and give your spiel, because I think there's something to this, but I want to get all the naysayers out first. And Greg, you're chief of the naysayers. Let's have it.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I'm not going to let you down. The thing that got my attention, first of all, is Notre Dame, right? And I go, reportedly, Chad is making $1 million and he was making $300,000 at Notre Dame. Now, it seems to me that if Notre Dame thought he was that important to them, that they would have divvied up some money to keep him. Now, it's highly possible that he's tired of the winter in South Bend, which I think was like 15 degrees, and he's got his family, his group there, and he says, this is a chance for me to go. I think the thing that I don't want to say it disturbs me, it just makes me shake my head, is how much everyone's saying this guy is going to be a difference maker. He's not going to be coaching. Okay. He's not going to be coaching. So he's not a coach, first of all. Number two, he's an administrator. Okay. He's an administrator. He's going to be told what he needs to do, and they'll probably listen to some of the things he said. But the reality is, no matter who you bring in, it's all about that scoreboard. It's about winning and losing. If they win and somebody says, Chad made a big difference, then you'd say, well, what did he do? What did he do? Now, I'm not here to say he didn't do a good job at Notre Dame because everything says that, and I'm not here to sit there and wave the flag of greatness because you read a press release, which generally brings out everything that that somebody has done well, which they should, but it really does still get back to winning games. So I hope he does a great job. I think relationships are important. But in the end, whatever is missing that he's supposed to replace, I'm very interested to hear specifically what he's going to do.
Well, guys, I'm a little bit surprised by this, and I'm surprised only because college football is now a professional sports league. We all know that. In the NFL, the idea that you would have a head football coach who is also solely in charge of figuring out the salary cap, solely in charge of handling those sorts of administrative functions, solely in charge of scouting and the like, would be highly unusual. And it's highly unusual because these jobs require different skill sets. And in college, you would add to that you're recruiting because you're not just drafting, which means you also have this recruiting / sales function. All of these require wildly different skill sets than what a head football coach requires. Why would we assume that the head football coach is the right guy to handle all that stuff? We don't assume it in any other professional league. So why would we assume it here? Now, whether Chad Bowden can do that really well or not, I don't know. Marcus Freeman seemed to like him. He's getting paid a lot of money, so somebody at USC is convinced. But whether he's the right guy or not, the idea that Lincoln Riley is the right guy to handle all that, Mark, we were talking about whether Lincoln Riley needs an offensive coordinator because he's stretched too thin. Offensive coordinator squarely within his skill set. I'm not convinced that overseeing salary caps, handling administrative work, overseeing a more sophisticated scouting department, I'm not convinced that any of that is within Lincoln Riley's skill set. So why in the world would we think it makes sense to have him handling them?
I don't know. I'm old enough to remember 5 years ago, before NIL and the transfer portal, head coaches were able to handle that. They didn't have a general manager, Chris. They had a recruiting coordinator.
What was the key phrase in your response, Mark Holkin?
Seems going to be great 5 years ago.
Yeah. Before things changed dramatically.
How is Chad Bowden going to control the transfer portal? NIL isn't USC's issue. We harp about it. We complain about it that it's not at the Oregon and Ohio State level. But where's that magic wand? What's going to control that transfer portal? Because when you're negotiating in good faith, like they did with Emmanuel Prayone, they gave him his new deal. They got him to play in the bowl game. You still have the transfer portal out there. How is Chad Bowden, again, I'm using a specific example. Again, how is he going to control the transfer portal? He's not. My point being, 5 years ago.
Should anybody try to control the transfer portal, Mark? Or should we just ignore it?
5 years ago, Chris, head coaches were still responsible for developing relationships, building relationships with coaching staffs, recruiting. That's the main focus I think everybody's focused on with Chad coming over to USC. He's going to reinvigorate USC's recruiting. I'm all for that. Great. Are you paying him $1 million to do that? Or are you paying him $1 million to be Lincoln Riley? No, you're doing it the wrong way, guy. What is his job? What if he tells Lincoln, you know what? I'm evaluating the program. I'm the general manager. You need an offensive coordinator. Is Lincoln and Chad, can they work well together? Do we know? Why can't we look at both sides of the coin here? It doesn't have to be.
I'm not sure what side of the coin I'm looking at. What you told me is that college football has changed dramatically over the last 5 years. But before that change, college head coaches could do this without a GM. And I say,
has building and developing relationships changed between a high school coach and a USC head football coach?
The answer is yes. And I'll tell you why it's yes. because now you have now doubled the amount of scouting you have to do, because you don't just have to scout high schools, and you don't only have this lengthy time period where with Jakeem Stewart they're recruiting that guy they were probably recruiting him since birth. Everybody was. But now you not only have that, but on top of that, you have the transfer portal chaos. Um, if you're suggesting that the head football coach, in this case, Lincoln Riley, when the transfer portal is going to open up right after his season ends, that Lincoln Riley should also be, in addition to being an offensive coordinator, head coach, glad hander, and fundraiser with alums, all the other stuff he has, that he's also supposed to be figuring out what linebacker from the FCS schools we should recruit, because
Man,
we
I'm
have
hearing a
too many
lot of
signings.
excuses right now, man. I'm hearing a lot of excuses. We're talking, you brought up Jakeem Stewart. I don't care who recruited him, the relationship that built, you and Eric and Greg and everybody watching the show knows. The relationship between USC and Jakeem Stewart is an NIL bag. You and I could have said, hey, Jakeem, I'm going to get you this.
That's not all it is. Ohio State and Oregon will offer him a bundle of money too. You think they
Not
won't
as much
offer
as
him big
USC.
money?
Not as much as USC.
Here's the problem, and USC fans make this mistake all the time.
And they're
It's
doing
not all in. It's not all money. It's not all money. It's not all money in college football. It's not all money in law. It's not all money in
I've got
medicine.
plenty of anecdotal evidence to say it is all about money.
It's not, man, because lots of schools will be offering similar packages to different players. And by the way, if you're trying to figure out who to offer the money to, that's a pretty sophisticated analysis also. And it's not clear to me why Lincoln Riley should be doing that between 1 and 3 a.m. instead of having a smart GM do it.
So you're right. A young man who's played 11 games in high school, somebody figured out at 1 a.m., let's just give him $2 million. That'll forge the relationship. Chris, come on, man. I'm just saying, let's look at things pragmatically here.
Okay, let's look at it pragmatically. Apparently, the primary qualification for a GM is how many games I've played in high school. Now, I played a lot of games in high school. I probably couldn't do the job. But we should go look at the most effective. Did Billy Beane play a bunch of high school games? Is that why he became a star GM? Come on, this doesn't make any sense, man. College football has become dramatically more complex in a very short period of time. And to expect that any football coach is a football coach will now be on top of complex financial decisions, twice the scouting that needed to be done before, and all the other things that have become more difficult. By the way, somebody needs to stay on top of what's going on in all kinds of other realms, the conference meetings in Congress, the NLRB, and everybody else, because everybody's trying to figure out where college football is headed. Should Lincoln Riley figure that out in the middle of the night after he does his other stuff too?
Not going down this rabbit hole. You can smile, you can smirk. For the last 3 years that Lincoln Riley has been USC's head coach, what's been the biggest complaint? He ignores Southern California recruits. So now you're going to bring a guy in from the Midwest to forge those relationships? Two things can be right at the same time, Chris. I hope Chad comes in and does all that GM stuff behind the scenes. I want my head coach being the one building relationships with the high school players in my backyard. Why can't?
That's fine, but your head coach is Lincoln Riley.
Okay.
So I don't know what Lincoln Riley's going to do, but I know that it makes sense to have somebody who can help with these other tasks if they're skilled. Marcus Freeman talked about how good a scout he was, right? That's a useful skill, especially in the day when you have the possibility of losing your entire roster overnight and you have about 2 weeks to go find a replacement defensive end. I mean, I don't know if the new GM is going to be a superstar or not. I have no idea. But the idea that you don't need a GM in this day and age strikes me nuts.
Why are you putting words in my mouth? Where did I say you don't need a GM?
I actually don't understand your argument, so I'm not trying to misstate it.
I'm saying
I literally don't understand what you're saying.
Giving this guy way too much credit. What he's coming in to do is do what Lincoln Riley was paid to do, $10.5 million, whatever his salary is. Remember, he's going to come in and he's going to get USC back into recruiting. He's going to build those relationships back. He's going to shut down the backyard. No, Oregon's not going to come in and poach anymore. That hasn't stopped. And it hasn't stopped because of NIL and because of the transfer portal. I don't think it's because of a lack of effort by USC's coaching staff. You really don't understand that? What I'm trying to convey?
You're trying to say he's not the savior of the program. I didn't think that Eric or I wasn't. I'm not sure anybody's saying he's a savior of the program. I'm saying if you have there is now a need for general manager duties that did not exist 10 years ago. If you can go and poach from if you can poach from your primary rival, somebody who's very skilled at that, and both help yourself and hurt them, that strikes me as a really fantastic thing. Is it going to mean that USC is going to be a perennial playoff team? I don't think anybody's suggesting that, but I'm suggesting it might help. That's all. Who else wants to weigh in? I want to fight with Mark forever, but at some point people get tired of listening to it.
It's so entertaining that you don't want to. It's just good theater. But, you know, from my perspective, so much is made. I think Mark brought up a good point. You know, in the old days, since I'm an old person, the truth of the matter is a lot of this stuff didn't exist. But it's very simple, in my opinion, to get down to what the facts are. I love to play at SC. I always wanted to play SC. But wow, Michigan's offering me twice as much money NIL. Okay, now we're talking about, like I think Chris has been getting to, the pro game mentality. Until college football decides to have its own league, okay, its own NCAA, so to speak, a lot of these things are can continue to be a problem. I don't care how many people you hire. You know, you can hire the best coaches in the world. I mean, how many offensive line coaches had USC brought in the last 15 years? They were all lousy. Well, part of it is, who did you recruit? So a lot of it's still interpersonal relationships, in my opinion. But in the end, you know, if SC can get back to winning, I think it's going to be harder than ever. That's my opinion. You know, the Pac-12 still looks pretty good to me. You know, what are you going to do? Say, oh, look, we came in 5th place in the Big 12 or Big 10. So in the end, look, this guy will be given a set of criteria. He may be told, we got to make sure the guys that are in our program stay in our program. They don't transfer somewhere else. How are we going to stop that? He's going to look at what Notre Dame knew about USC in terms of weaknesses in recruiting. But I will say this, and then I'll conclude with it. As Mark mentioned, Lincoln Riley's getting paid a boatload of money. He doesn't go, and he doesn't, to my knowledge, he doesn't go and meet with people at luncheons, the Monday morning quarterback, all these things that are probably not overly exciting to him. But basically, his personality is such that he doesn't want to do it. If he really thought it, do you think Pete Carroll would do it? How many things would Pete Carroll do that Lincoln Riley won't do or doesn't feel comfortable doing? That's not a knock on Riley. We all have our own personalities. But it's got to start with Riley. And I know what people are already saying, you don't like Riley. Look, here's what I like. I like winning. I like, if someone's going to get paid that amount of money, having everything in place. I don't like, which I knew was a problem at the beginning, and those who, you know, read me for years have been, you know, heard me talk about recruiting Southern California. I don't know how many players have left us. It's not that a lot of players leave us. We're saying it's who they are. Players going to Notre Dame. Okay, that's always happened. But in this case, how many are still making a choice between USC and Notre Dame? If USC was really on the run with Lincoln Riley, they probably get some of these people. Number two, I think that in essence, you have to ask yourself, you know, a lot of questions about how are we going to change recruiting in Southern California? Well, how do you usually change anything? You win. And if they win, a lot of this stuff becomes, accessory information.
Well, chicken and egg problem there, right? It's hard to, you say if you win, it helps your recruiting, but it also is easier to win if you have Oregon, Ohio State's, and Texas roster compared to what USC has this year, right? I mean, it is. One thing I will say though,
Chris, this is kind of my last thought about Bowden. The reason that relationships still matter in this, and why it's not just somebody went here because there's more money. You have to get to that point. USC did not sit down in front of Jakeem Stewart when he was 14 years old and say, "This is how much NIL we're going to offer you," or when he was 15, or the relationship with, his coach as he's going through that Eric Henderson had. You have to reel those guys in so that they stay interested in you enough. And this is transfer portal stuff. This is NIL agents, the relationships you build with those guys. This is all of that. They have to be reeled in long enough to where you can get to the end and then sit down and say, okay, here's what we've got. And if you get to that point and you say, here's what we've got, and they go, well, this is what I've got over here, and they go somewhere else, you're in the game. And I think Chad Bowden keeps USC in the game with more guys out of the portal and out of high school recruiting moving forward than USC was in with before that, because he's an additional guy. And he's very, very good at that. So again, you got to be backed up with NIL. Nobody's coming to USC for free moving forward and just saying, well, I like that guy, so I'm giving up all this money. But yes, he has that sort of personality and that tenacity where I guarantee you USC will get guys for less than they could get other places. Not everybody, but any little advantage like that in this sort of playoff system is something that you have to invest in.
Well, I don't think it's, excuse me, Chris, I don't think it's a disadvantage for what he's going to do. And it's a possibility he's going to be a superstar. It's also a possibility that after he gets this, he thinks he's going to go to the NFL, which is fine. But in the end, whatever his personal motives are, will be to do a good job, do everything he can do. And as far as if anybody wants to sit there and pay attention to it, again, go back to recruiting. Many of the publications have USC -- 2 in the country, I think, for the class of 2026. Okay. Now the question is, can they maintain it? This is a real question to me. They have not been able to maintain a lot of commitments. I mean, it might be the NIL, who knows, but they haven't. So this will be interesting to see if this kid, I call him a kid, he's a man, knows something about USC that needs to be changed immediately, and a bigger, stronger effort has to be put into it.
I tell you what, the other thing that we all should be able to agree on, I think, is that with this hire, with Rob Ryan's hire, with the hire of the defensive staff the year before that, Jim Cohen is taking away every single one of Lincoln Riley's excuses. NIL has improved. It's not Oregon, but it's improved dramatically. USC can spend money on players now that they couldn't 3 years ago. This is another example. If you've wondered, and at many times over the last 10, 15 years, I've wondered whether USC's administration is really committed to football success. There is no question that USC's administration is committed to football success at this point. And if Lincoln Riley says, I need a general manager, I want to give that guy a bump in salary of 3 times what he's making at Notre Dame because he's a superstar, USC's writing that check. They'll go out and get Rob Ryan. They'll go out and get Lynn and Henderson and Belk and all these other guys. At some point, Lincoln Riley either wins or he doesn't win, but there is no excuse for failure. There's not.
That's the very first thing I wrote in my article on Sunday.
Yeah.
USC spared no expense. And to your point, all I would say is this. Was this Lincoln Riley going to Jen Cohen saying, hey, I need this? Or is this Jen Cohen saying, Lincoln Riley, you need this?
I would hope
either way, I'm happy with it, right? Either way, I'm happy with it. This is.
Oh, but it does tell 2 different stories, though. That's why I'm And that's why I'm coming maybe from the more cynical point of view on this, setting an expectation level.
I think in the end, the person that has the biggest issue is Jen Cohen, and I'll tell you why. Because no matter whether she agrees with it or we all agree with it, Riley's contract, whoever his agent was, and we pretty much know who that was, did a good job of making sure that if SC had any thoughts of ever having to get rid of this guy early, that there'd be a heavy dues to pay. And I think of how SC treated Clay Helton in the sense that they kept holding on to him because of the money. I think that maybe the new athletic director, who's done a good job, in my opinion, is retarded by or withdrawn from making a move because financially it's not a good idea. Now, we do have people at USC that could pay money if they want to, but they really have, it's going to be up to her to be really aggressive on how she wants to go on for the future. I think SC will obviously start off 2-0, probably 3-0, based on their schedule. But it's what happens when they face Notre Dame again. It's all these teams that especially the big. I mean, if Maryland can beat USC and that's Maryland's only win, you got to take that into serious consideration and say we can't let that type of thing happen again.
Yeah. Well, no, certainly losing to Maryland is not a good thing. But I guess my point is that USC, whoever's instigating this move, certainly when it comes to assistant coaching hires, I don't think Jen Cohen is forcing assistant coaches on Lincoln Riley. And by the way, nobody was going to fire Lincoln Riley after 2 down years. Nobody would do that. It wouldn't make any sense. John McKay had back-to-back down years multiple times during his career. In fact, he had 2 back-to-back down years before he had maybe the greatest college football team of all time. I'm not suggesting USC's team next year will be the 72 team. What I am saying is that back-to-back down years happen. What Jen Cohen has done is said, I'm going to give you absolutely everything you need to win. That means I'm gonna do what I can to open up the NIL spigot. I'm gonna give you the new facility. I'm gonna give you the coaching staff you need. I'm gonna give you the GM you need. I'm gonna give you absolutely everything you need. And that's all we can ask of her. Whether we can ask more of Lincoln Riley is going to depend on how many games USC wins next year and the year after that. At some point, if he's not winning games, he has to go. It's too early for that talk right now. It doesn't make any sense. But at some point they will. And when that day comes, if it comes, Lincoln Riley will not be able to say, well, it's because my hands were tied, right? I had the handcuffs on. He won't be able to say it. And more importantly, the next USC coach, whoever that is, when they're trying to recruit him to leave his school and come to USC, he will know that if you come to USC under Jen Cohen and this administration, you will get absolutely everything you need to win. And that's what we want coaches to understand. Because there was a time when that wasn't true about USC football. The time not too long ago. So at least it shows USC is serious.
Two more points quick about the Bowden thing. Outside of the Leach/Riley tree, which anybody who comes in and a lot of the recent ones we've seen, the additions have been that. And I think just fresh blood, new ideas, all of that. You have to have that. You have to have kind of differing viewpoints in a program. And then he's spent time in Southern California, lived in Hollywood for a bunch of years. So he's got some, Southern California knowledge and all of that stuff. So he's not, it's not a guy who grew up forever here and is a USC fan and all that, but at least comes in with some depth of knowledge of the area. And Greg specifically mentioned Notre Dame as a team that kept pulling guys out of Southern California. He's plenty familiar making trips out here.
Yeah. By the way, every time we have a little combative exchange on this show, we get why don't you guys be nice to each other? Mark and I love each other. You don't have to worry about that. Okay.
I worry about that.
I know you do, Greg, but you don't have to. I'm trying to set your mind at ease. All right, listen. I got something important to say about getting timeout. Okay? I want you. this week, USC is going to have a bunch of recruits on campus. I don't know their names. We don't know. But they're going to show up and they're going to go to the basketball game, Michigan State at USC. If you want to see who USC is recruiting, if you want to walk up and hand $1,000 bills to some recruits this weekend and call it NIL for your company.
You're going to make me put a disclaimer at the bottom of this right now.
I was going to
gonna be
offer
extra work. I have to verbally disclaimer, right? Don't do that. I think we have to
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Send your $1,000 bills to me, and I will do what I can to promote USC recruiting. Go to the Game Time app, download it. If you haven't bought on the Game Time app, and by the way, you should have. I don't know how many weeks I've been telling you to do it. Go do it. I bought on the Game Time app, but if you haven't done it, you can put in ON3, ON3. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Yeah, go to the Galen Center. There's probably some other stuff going on. I bet they have Super Bowl tickets too. I haven't checked because I don't pay that kind of money for NFL games. But, go do it. Good service, good prices. Okay, fellas. The Big Ten and the SEC are having some meetings coming up. And I saw that there were some probably trial balloons floated out there about what the two conferences think might be appropriate, such as a 14-team playoff and 4 teams each from those two conferences, 2 from ACC, 2 from the Big 12, and either Notre Dame or the next highest, something like that. I don't know if that's what they're going to come up with. I don't know what they're going to talk about necessarily, but that's what I want to know. What should they be talking about in these meetings? The two power conferences, the two organizations best placed to put college football on a sound footing, to get it headed the right direction. What should they be talking about? What sort of resolution should they come up with? Greg Katz, I want to hear from you.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Arledge. I think, I don't know if there's a lot of stuff, but there is some stuff to me that, from my perspective, centralized it. Number one, the game times. Now, I realize that some of the game times are for different reasons, West Coast viewing audience, but that's what happens when you have a conference that's from coast to coast. My thing is, how many times are going to have a West Coast team playing so early that it really does make a difference? And to me, that's a competitive advantage for teams that aren't on the West Coast. Now, they knew that was going to be an issue. So now that they've had it for a year and they've had a chance to hear it and the problems, what are they going to do? Are they going to have, just as an example, USC go play, play at Michigan one game, and then a couple of games later they end up going to Maryland? You just go, well, wait a minute. Maybe they need to have a two league system. I know a lot of times people don't like that. They want to see the best 2 teams. Television will decide what these leagues are going to do for the best audiences. I think that the Big Ten has stumbled on to a great opening with the SEC. The Big Ten owns the last 2 national championships, right? So here's the thing. That's kind of moving away. It doesn't mean the SEC won't be great, okay? Because the SEC, the fan bases are what really makes a big difference as a league thing. But to me, the Big Ten has to sit there and say, because we want it more, because that worked for the SEC. Now, what is the SEC going to do? We want it more, better this time around. So it's going to be interesting. Plus, I'm not so sure that Alabama can maintain anything close to what Saban did, because I think they'll still be good, maybe very good, but I don't think it's quite the same thing. Mark, don't do that with your face. It's going to stick.
I was frowning at something else, Greg. I apologize.
I've told you to stay off those sites. The bottom line is timing, scheduling. Maybe they should go to a 2-conference, 2-division thing to make it fun. I know it's not a good idea if you get a 5th-ranked team in the Big Ten playing against the 1st-ranked team in the Big Ten in different divisions, because that's going to be, not a good thing. So we'll have to see, but I am curious to hear what the rest of you think about what the Big Ten needs to do and SC input in it.
I'm moderately curious to hear. Mark, what do you have to say?
These are two power conferences. I mean, let's just be honest. What they should be talking about behind closed doors when everybody's not listening is getting the infrastructure ready for what Greg was alluding to. Breaking away from the NCAA, hiring a commissioner. We know they're going to a 14-team playoff system. They've already been talking about it before the 12-team system started. So let's just get the ball rolling. We've moved so far in that direction already. Let's not pretend that it's not going to happen or play naive. Let's just get there. So yeah, the SEC and the Big Ten, they could absorb the teams from the ACC and the Big 12, make that line of demarcation between them and the Boise States and the Oregon States of the world now. And let's just go forward, because we debated about this for the whole first segment, the direction of college football. It's all about analytics and general managers, NIL, free agency, and relationships come into that at some part as well. Yeah, just rip off the Band-Aid. Let's go. Let's get it done.
I think one of the Band-Aids that could get ripped off, Mark, is the direction that college football is going, more like the NFL. It won't shock me and shouldn't shock anybody else that at some point in time, these players coming out of high school have agents, and they will pay.
No, they already do that.
No, Mark, relax.
Cross that bridge.
Relax, Mark, take a chill pill. Here's the deal. It was happening in basketball for many, many, many decades under the table. Now this stuff is being put on the table and is reminding us what you have to do when you put things on the table. That you have to say many, many, many years ago, baseball players didn't have agents. They had to go work at a used car lot during the off season. Now they have, and people say, oh, they can't have agents. They're not entertainers. But through the course of the system, they became, and credit to them, especially, and the difficultness of some of their agents, to have that feeling that, agents are going to be there for basketball. They're going to be there for football. If they're there for basketball, they're all going to do the same thing. It's just a matter of when they do it. So my thing is, they better be prepared for agents representing high school players above board. And that's something, if you had, as Mark mentioned, if they have a commission or a system or a governing body that they all get together and they go, this is what's best for the game. That's what's going to be important. Those rules will all go into effect. I think it'll help dramatically when they do that.
Greg, that's what I'm trying to say. We're already there. We've crossed that bridge. High school players, regardless of the sport, they have their agents already. They're negotiating NIL deals to go to college. So
I'm aware of that. Yeah.
No,
I was there. I know that, but the thing is how they define it. If I'm an NIL agent working in Newport Beach, am I going to sit there and say, this is what I think you should do if I were you?
Well, look, the agents have to be certified in other professional sports leagues. There are some standards around what they can and cannot do. There's nothing like that in college football right now. The truth is there are no rules in college football right now. And that's probably part of what the SEC and the Big Ten need to get on top of, because if those two conferences decide on a way forward, it's going to be very difficult for anybody else to toe the line. Eric McKinney, what should they do in these meetings?
There's a lot of NIL stuff. There's a lot of playoff stuff. 14 is the playoff games were great. I'd want 100 playoff games, but it's when you're getting to that point, stop. Eight's fine. 12 is, I think, the absolute max, but whatever. I'm gonna go a little bit smaller. I think a more standardized officiating group across, especially those two conferences, to where we're not having such discrepancies in how does this league call this, how does this league call that, especially once you get to the playoff, and then we we got to change our whole game plan based on what, crew we have. Like if you look at I think it's like penalties per game for opponents. The top Big Ten team is like 42. The bottom teams, Ohio State, Northwestern, Michigan, Michigan State, the bottom four, Penn State is one after that. So you've got a huge chunk of the Big Ten teams not getting penalties called against their opponents. Again, that's not a conference that throws a ton of flags when they go in and play something else. How are we going to get officiated? Again, if those two eventually are going to split off, we're going to have our own thing. Start figuring that out, right? If there's crews that kind of float between them and you just have a more sort of, again, standardized look at how we're going to call things and what to expect going into some of this stuff. And I know, the NFL has that, and there's still games where it's like, what are they looking at here? What are they doing here? It's impossible to get it all the way across. But I do think that starting to take steps forward there is a significant aspect when it just comes to, on the field product, what we're seeing. That's one there too. But yeah, the how are we handling NIL? How are we going forward with the playoffs? How do we operate in a tiered system, even in their own conferences? I mean, you're gonna split the Big Ten and the SEC away from some of these other conferences. The bottom four teams, three teams, whatever it is in each of those leagues, Northwestern's not competing with Ohio State. I mean, I know it's always been like that, but it feels even more kind of separated now as we move forward.
You
You're
know,
starting to see that relegation's the way to go, Eric. I'm starting to jump on that boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, one thing they can do is they can deal with this transfer nonsense. The NCAA has decided wash their hands of it. It's very easy for the Big Ten and the SEC to say, okay, well, the NCAA says you can transfer whenever you want, and that's fine. But if you don't transfer by X date, then you're simply not eligible to compete in the Big Ten, right? They could do that. That's easy enough to accomplish. And if, look, you want to take a guy in the middle of the season from another program, he'll be eligible starting September of the following season. You want to give him a scholarship and you want it to count against your numbers and you want to pay him money to sit there for that long? Go ahead. We don't care. That's at least an easy fix. They can fix it. They can also fix this ridiculous transfer portal in December thing, right? And probably the early signing period. If the Big Ten and the SEC simply said, this is when we're going to allow transfers in our conference. This is when we're going to uh, this is our schedule. Big 12, you do what you want. ACC, you do what you want. But this is what we're going to do. They're going to end up setting the rules that are going to apply to everybody, practically speaking, because the separation between the Big Ten and the SEC and the other two power conferences is so vast right now. I don't think those conferences are in a position to buck against whatever these two conferences say. So some things they can do, and part of it is they need to start. It's been talked about for a long time, this breaking away from the NCAA and having a separate governing body only for the highest level of college football and college basketball. Fine. Start that process right now. Let's get that going and let's get some rules that make sense. Maybe you'll get help from Congress, maybe you won't. But at the very least, you can start to set some things in place that make sense, and everybody else will end up having to follow along, I think.
one of the things that I want to add to what I think SC should push in those meetings probably won't happen. I'd like to see a 16-team playoff, but no buys. I think the excitement that you saw in the opening rounds, even in games that we quote mismatches eventually, the excitement was the enthusiasm was good. I'd also like to see, which won't happen, but I think it should or could, is the national championship game played on New Year's Day at the Rose Bowl. And I think that would be good. You'd say, well, what are you going to do with the other bowl games? You know what? You can sandwich them before the national championship game. You can have some on Friday like they're doing. They can have some on Thursday. But this buy thing is going to just to me, is unfair to the teams that were good enough to play, and then they have to wait. And who knows? I mean, what was that second round game? We had Georgia and who was it? The big one. There was a big one. I can't.
Georgia Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. It happens in basketball, but I would love to see SC maybe host. I mean, if that time comes, 1 or 2 games at home stadium. You know, the NFL doesn't mind as long as the seats are filled and people are watching.
Yeah.
You can't add more teams and also slide the schedule up a month, though. I mean, that's not going to work to play that on January 1st.
Right. Originally, they scheduled the conference title games because you have too many teams to play each other and because it makes a lot of money. Well, if you're going to have the top 4 teams from the Big Ten go to the playoff anyway, you do not need a conference title game. You've more than made up for that money. You don't need that extra week. And it doesn't make any sense at this point. I know Joel Klatt was talking about how that would determine who makes a bye. Forget about that nonsense. You don't need it. Play the regular season. Your top 4 teams are in.
And I think that you give, I think there need to be more home games too. I mean, that's you want to talk about, oh, we dilute the regular season and all that. No. You have a great regular season. You get, and we saw how much of an advantage that was. I don't care. You have a great regular season and you get that advantage in the playoff. I think, and now those regular season matchups at the end where they're both going to get into the playoffs. Does this really matter? Whatever. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's close with this. Last week we talked about the defensive players we're excited to see in the spring or hear about in the spring. I'm not sure what we'll be able to watch. Let's flip to the other side of the ball. Let's talk about the offensive players we're excited to see this spring. And why don't you everybody just give me one? And if somebody takes your one, then I don't know what to do for you. But let's do it. Greg, I don't want anybody to take your guy. So why don't you go ahead and start us off? What's the offensive player you're most interested to see and hear about this spring?
Well, there's more than one, but the one that kind of intrigues me is Makai Lemon, because I thought that he has really made, considering he was kind of like the other guy when the transfers, were here and now they're gone. And he was number one. I hope that they will use him and show in the spring just how dynamic he can be, because I think he's got everything it takes to be dynamic and be, maybe, a first or second round draft pick. Maybe not first at this point, but mosey his way up there. I know they need offensive linemen. We know that. There's going to be some guys that are going to get better. We know that. But Lemon to me is, he's going to be great. But again, that goes back to another thing, the quarterback competition. And we can talk about that at another time.
Makai Lemon. Okay, that's a good one. I think we're all excited about Makai. He's really taken huge strides. Mark, who's your guy?
I'm gonna use a little bit of an Eric McKinney trick here. I'm gonna say the quarterback position is the player.
Pushing your luck, man.
The reason why is if there's ever a year that you can say, you know what if Lincoln Riley says, I'm going to start a freshman quarterback? It would be this year. You're bringing in 5-star top quarterback in the state of California, one of the top quarterbacks in the country. You're opening up a home. We talked about this earlier in the show against Missouri State, Georgia Southern. If that's not a perfect way to break in new meat at quarterback, and then your first road game is against a program that's got a brand new head coach, new coaching staff, new roster. I mean, it's almost ideal. So what I'm looking for in the spring is, has Jaden Mayava, has he taken that next step? Can he separate himself and say, you know what, Husan, you got the talent, but you're going to have to wait now? Or has Husan learned the playbook enough by the end of spring where now Lincoln Riley's thinking, all right, fall camp, we're really going to dive into this because of the way the schedule sets up. I mean, if there's ever a year to consider playing a true freshman at quarterback, 2025 would be the year.
You heard it here first. Mark Holken is in favor of Longstreet winning the job. Eric McKinney, who's your guy?
All these guys that just love the skill guys and don't want to talk about what actually wins college football games, right? So
Disappointing.
you have to go. You have to go to the offensive line. And again, like with defense, the answer is going to be all the transfers, right? Anytime there's a new person, you want to see them. But because that's easy, I'm going to kind of make it more of a challenge and just stick to returning guys. There's a few. Tobias Raymond, I think, is who I'll settle on. As does he make that jump? The right. I mean, we've got into how many years now? What's the right tackle? What's the right tackle spot? What's the right tackle spot going to look like? And it's sort of been, pieced together, and we brought this guy in, and we think this guy's going to make a jump, and whatever. Is DJ Wingfield the guy? Does he end up there? I know he has guard experience. There's a couple spots where you could play him, but does Tobias Raymond just show up and go, no, that's mine. No, that's my spot. And that I think is a big question. I don't know if I would sit here at this point and say, yeah, that's a sure thing. But with this offense right now, you need a few things to kind of click into place for you based on who they've added, who's there, what kind of positions they still need. Boy, if he takes a big jump and you see something real from him this spring, that helps a lot.
Yeah. Raymond was actually my guy because I agree with that. He appeared to take some big strides. I mean, I think everybody looked at him as a project when he showed up, which wasn't very long ago, but he played as a redshirt freshman a lot better than what you'd expect a redshirt freshman project to play. I'm going to go to the other side of the line though. I'm going to talk about Elijah Page. Um, Page got much better as the year went on, right? That Michigan game was about as bad as you'll ever see a tackle play in a college football game, and it was embarrassing. But he didn't get embarrassed against Texas A&M. He didn't get embarrassed against Penn State. He didn't get embarrassed against Notre Dame. He played much better as the year went on. He was not dominant, but he became a pretty decent left tackle. My question is whether Elijah Page is ready to take that next step and become an all-conference caliber rock on the left side of the line and a guy who's going to be drafted in the first day of the NFL draft. I don't know if he's going to, obviously, but that makes a big difference for your offense if your blind side is just locked down, right? It's just if you have Tony Baselli there, you don't worry about the pass rusher behind you. You don't have to, right? It's just something you don't have to think about. Elijah Page obviously wasn't there this past year, but with the gains he made and coming into now his third year in the program, he may make another jump. And it would be nice if you just didn't have to worry about that backside rusher ever again. So I'm curious to see that.
And all of a sudden you don't have right with the left guard hole like that. Now it's even more on him.
Yep, agreed. Okay, good. Well, we're going to talk about some more of these guys in the weeks to come. We may pick another guy each week in the next few weeks, but I think that's it for now. Unless you guys want to say something else before we sign off. Anybody want to say something? Anything you've been dying to say? You haven't had a chance because I didn't ask you.
I just can't wait till spring ball, but we don't know when spring ball is going to take place. Have they given the dates yet?
In the spring, Greg. In the spring.
That was very,
Does
very
anybody
cheap.
care? Does anybody care about USC basketball?
Mark, it's a football
does
show. What are
anybody
you
care?
talking about?
I mean, some people care, but not like they care at Duke or Kansas. That being said, USC's women team is about to win the national championship. They're going to go on a run, man. They're going to go on a run. They're going to do it. I think. I don't know.
They are good. No, they will
are
be
good.
in that
They are
mix.
good. They are good. I'm not the greatest scout of women's college basketball, to be honest. I have no idea, but I know they're good. Okay, that's it. Greg had something to say. Mark had something to say. Eric didn't, and that's fine. We're just going to leave it right there. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Until then, fight on, everybody.